Tonight, Sydney's New Year's Eve celebrations are wound back as the COVID cluster lingers. A Chinese citizen journalist who documented the early Wuhan outbreak jailed for 4 years. And another top-order collapse sees Australia struggling in the second test.
That is a huge moment in this match.
Good evening, Manny Tsigos with ABC News. There have been 5 new cases added to the Sydney cluster today, and all of them are close contacts of a known case. But the New South Wales Premier has announced new restrictions on Sydney's New Year's Eve celebrations. A harbour party for frontline workers has been cancelled, and the rest of the city has been told to watch the famous fireworks display from home.
Sydney's New Year's Eve wasn't going to be the same, but it's now been scaled back even further.
On New Year's Eve, we don't want any crowds on the foreshores around Sydney whatsoever.
The short midnight fireworks display has been saved.
There pretty much hasn't been much work for anyone in this business over the last 8 months, so obviously it was a concern that New Year's Eve might not go ahead.
Fortunato Foti wasn't spared by the pandemic, but with the fireworks guaranteed, it's looking like he may be able to have a shave.
The COVID bit started in May, and I figured I'll keep it going until COVID's finished, and I figured if there wasn't any fireworks, I'd be able to play Santa somewhere.
25,000 fireworks will go off in the show that's been cut from 12 to 7 minutes.
I think the overall spectacle will be great.
Here is the start of the exclusionary or green zone, where only residents, their guests and those with restaurant bookings are allowed in on New Year's Eve. Police officers will be out in force, but it's not yet clear how many will be needed or where they'll be stationed.
When the clock ticks over to midnight, I know that's normally an emotional time where we like to kiss and hug everybody around us. Can I just ask for absolute restraint?
Not running the risk so next year doesn't mirror the last. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
Victoria's border will remain closed to anyone who's been to Sydney for at least another week. Victoria's Health Minister has also confirmed there won't be any changes to restrictions on New Year's Eve, meaning caps on numbers will stay at 30 people for home gatherings, 50 people per dance floor and 1 person per 2 square metres at hospitality venues.
Victoria Police will be out and about, making sure that public venues are safe, and I would urge all Victorians to keep a COVID-safe New Year's Eve and a COVID-safe summer.
Another 2 travellers who've returned from overseas have tested positive. The woman in her 20s and a child under 10 are both in hotel quarantine. A Queensland woman who's dying from breast cancer is pleading with health officials to stop ignoring specialists and allow her to quarantine at home. The 49-year-old, who recently returned from overseas, has been ordered into hospital for 2 weeks, and her family is concerned that could make her even more sick.
After 3 months of urgent overseas cancer treatment, all Lisa Laird wants is to recover in the comfort of her own home.
I'm terminally ill. A metastatic stage 4. I mean, to get an exemption, what else must one do?
Despite recommendations from specialists that she should be exempt from mandatory quarantine, the immunocompromised 49-year-old has been knocked back 3 times, instead being forced into the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital for at least 2 weeks.
It's horrifying for her, it really is. The legislation exists for the exemption, for medical exemptions, for critical situations, but they haven't even followed it. All it's just been a blank generic no.
I just don't understand why common sense isn't prevailing. I've passed 2 COVID tests. I'm prepared to do another COVID test.
The pair has accused Queensland Health of ignoring doctors' advice and says a hospital stay will do more harm than good. They're pleading with officials to review her case.
The possibility exists that there is COVID patients in that ward.
I'm losing condition and weight. I'm not eating because of the ulcers in my mouth. I need fresh food. I need fresh air.
Queensland Health wouldn't comment specifically on Mrs Laird's case, but in a statement said, "We understand the health directions in place are strict, but they are designed to protect Queenslanders from COVID-19. It said very few exemptions from quarantine are granted, and those who are admitted into hospital must remain there for the full 2 weeks. The state's dedicated exemption team is also copping criticism from the opposition, which claims some people in quarantine have been unable to get through to the department during the holiday period, leaving people in the dark about their applications. But Queensland Health says it has been working through Christmas and is continuing to process exemption requests.
We need to make sure that someone's on the other end of the phone or answering the emails. People are already upset and concerned. They don't know what's going on, and this just exacerbates their anxiety.
Overnight, 5 new cases of COVID-19 were detected, all picked up in hotel quarantine. 2 people on board a super yacht docked in Cairns who tested positive last week are no longer being considered active cases. Health authorities say while they're still shedding the virus, they aren't infectious. Talissa Siganto, ABC News, Brisbane.
A leading epidemiologist is warning Australia's COVID-19 containment measures are even more crucial now that a new strain of the virus has been detected in hotel quarantine. The strain that emerged from southeast England is believed to be 70% more contagious.
A call to bolster infection control to protect the community as the new highly contagious strain of COVID-19 seeps into Australia.
So hotel quarantine, the way we manage our international air crews when they return to Australia, all those things become so much more important because if it gets into the community, it would take off.
A woman in hotel quarantine who had recently returned from the UK tested positive to the new strain in Adelaide yesterday. There's no sign the variant makes patients any sicker, but it is up to 70% more contagious.
We don't change what we're doing, we just need to step it up and make sure there are no areas where this virus could cross over from our international border into the community.
The woman is in a stable condition here at the Royal Adelaide Hospital and is being treated in a separate area for COVID positive patients. The hospital says its standards of infection control are as high as possible, including the air conditioning, which can be set to pandemic mode and isolate certain areas. Authorities say vaccines will work on the new strain and treatments may be available here earlier than originally hoped. Pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca has briefed the Federal Health Minister on new data, claiming to show its vaccine is just as effective as others on the market. Australia has ordered 50 million doses of the Oxford University-developed product and 10 million courses of the Pfizer vaccine.
We've set March as our commencement date. I'll continue to provide that. But we are ahead of schedule and our approach is to under-promise and over-deliver.
The federal government is expecting most Australians to be vaccinated by October next year. South Australia has also recorded 1 new case of COVID-19 today, a returned traveller who has been in hotel quarantine. Claire Campbell, ABC News, Adelaide.
A Chinese citizen journalist who reported on the coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan has been jailed for 4 years. Zhang was charged for spreading false information on social media earlier this year when the virus was at its peak. Her lawyer says she'll likely appeal the case. Yvonne Yong reports.
37-year-old Zhang Zhan's first-hand accounts of what was happening at the epicentre of the virus back in February were widely shared on social media. But as is the case for several other citizen journalists in China, it's got her into trouble. Authorities feel they're being undermined by what they call inaccurate reporting.
就我拍了几张医院的病人的照片，然后国保就突然发现，就在警告我说，你不要去这些地方。回来！把手机关了。我叫你把手机关了，你不行我就给你发火了。你给我发火吧。
The former lawyer was detained by police in May. She was formally charged last month for sending false information on platforms such as WeChat, Twitter and YouTube. A court in Shanghai has found her guilty of picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Supporters have been met with tight security.
I came here to try and see her. I went there just now, but the staff told me it's not allowed, especially in a criminal case.
Ms Zhang has maintained her innocence and since June has been on hunger strike to protest her arrest. Her lawyers say she is in poor health. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
Meanwhile, China has rejected the United States' calls to release 12 Hong Kong residents. Earlier, a spokesperson for the US Embassy in Beijing released a statement saying their so-called crime was to flee tyranny. The group is accused of attempting to flee Hong Kong by speedboat amid a government crackdown on dissent in the city. The trials of 10 of the 12 began today. Separate hearings are expected for 2 minors who were also aboard the boat. Beijing has urged the US to stop interfering with its domestic affairs.
China urges the US to earnestly abide by the international law and basic norms of international relations, immediately stop taking over the Hong Kong issue and interfering in China's internal affairs, and immediately stop meddling in China's judicial sovereignty.
And now to some breaking news. A crew member on a cattle export ship that arrived in Darwin has tested positive for COVID-19, according to Northern Territory health authorities. They say that the Diamantina vessel arrived in Darwin from Indonesia on Sunday night. They say a 25-year-old crew member was tested on board on arrival and didn't leave the ship before he was taken into isolation at Royal Darwin Hospital. NT authorities say the majority of crew members are now in the Howard Springs quarantine facility, while some are in self-isolation on board the ship in accordance with maritime law. There's a sense of hope across Europe tonight as a mass vaccination program gets underway there. The ambitious plan is being rolled out simultaneously in all 27 nations of the EU to inoculate more than 450 million people, and it should be complete within 12 months. Here's Europe correspondent Linton Besser.
10 months after Europe's outbreak began, here in Codogno, Italy's ground zero, the cavalry has finally arrived.
Grazie. Grazie. Con tutto rispetto per I medici e per gli infermieri.
We all, paramedics, doctors and nurses, have worked in a sort of no man's land, not on the front line.
COVID-19 was first found here in a 38-year-old man. Now there have been 2 million cases in Italy and 70,000 are dead. At last, some hope.
The vaccine now represents a light of hope, a reason to look to the future, thinking that we took the right path towards the solution.
From the Vatican, the Pope paid tribute to those fighting on the front line.
I'm also thinking about doctors, nurses, and all health workers whose great commitment fighting the virus has had significant repercussions on their family life.
27 countries are coordinating a mass inoculation campaign for some 450 million people.
Once enough people have been vaccinated, we can start travelling, meeting our friends and family again, and have normal holidays, which we all long for.
Airports, convention centres and hospital wings have been converted into immunisation centres. Priority is being shown to the elderly and to hospital workers.
If I can contribute, I gladly do so. I sort of feel obliged to do so.
But Europe remains in the grip of a second wave of infections. The EU has orders for no fewer than 2 billion doses of the vaccine and is determined that this winter will be its last under lockdown. Linton Besser, ABC News.
US President Donald Trump has signed off on a $3 trillion stimulus bill and averted a partial government shutdown. The unexpected move ends the turmoil he created when he called the bill a disgrace after it was passed in the House and Senate. The legislative package, which includes more than $1 trillion in pandemic aid, will continue unemployment benefits to millions of Americans. It will also provide funds for the distribution of vaccines, funds for schools and small businesses, and the money needed to keep the government open for the remainder of the financial year. The first of Australia's controversial joint strike fighters have been declared ready for deployment following a comprehensive 2-year trial. The Royal Australian Air Force says the F-35 has achieved initial operational capability, meaning the multi-role aircraft can now conduct combat missions. 30 of the Lockheed Martin-designed stealth fighters have already arrived in Australia, with Defence ordering a total of 72 aircraft at a cost of $17 billion. Australia first signed up to the US-led program in 2002. Authorities are investigating the death of a pilot in a small light aircraft accident at the Serpentine airfield south of Perth this afternoon. Emergency crews were called to the airfield just after 2:30 after reports of a crash landing. It's understood the pilot was the sole occupant in the two-seater amateur-built Sportster plane. Police and Australian Transport Safety Bureau officers are investigating. The ATSB wants anyone who witnessed the crash or any part of the aircraft's flight to contact them. Well, every year, approximately 1,000 Australians die from a rare and incurable form of blood cancer. The cost of the treatment has been prohibitive for most Australians, but now a new type of medication has been added to the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, bringing fresh hope to patients. Leanne Wong reports.
Jill Howie was diagnosed with multiple myeloma back in 2011, but she hasn't let it slow her down.
It's a bit of an uncertain feeling. But I always felt I was in good hands and I was optimistic that the outcome would do well.
More than 2,000 Australians are diagnosed with the incurable form of blood cancer every year. It affects white blood cells and disables immune systems. Doctors estimate half of patients will die within 5 years of their diagnosis, but Mrs Howie has been one of the lucky few to receive treatment using Darzalex, a medication which has now been made available on the PBS.
My blood readings are excellent. When I go to see the doctor, I talk about everything else but my health, really. It's just been wonderful.
Previously, the treatment options were quite limited. Now we've got a new drug acting in a completely new way, which gives very, very deep responses, which means that patients can go for many years before they need further treatment.
Darzalex works by latching onto multiple myeloma cells and triggering the patient's own immune system to attack cancer cells, but it's previously been out of reach for most patients.
Darzalex would otherwise cost over $160,000. 1,165 Australians will now benefit from Darzalex being available at as little as $6.60 a dose.
Darzalex will only be available to patients who have relapsed or those who haven't responded to other treatment. While it's not a cure for multiple myeloma, doctors say it works for several years and they expect it to become the primary drug for the cancer.
When things like this happen, not only creates hope, but it also means people are taking notice.
I feel very lucky, 9 years it's been, I feel very, very lucky.
Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
After 4 years of construction, Crown has launched its new Sydney resort and restaurants, but the fate of its casino remains in doubt. It was a low-key affair at Barangaroo today. The hospitality precinct was able to open after receiving its liquor licence earlier this month. But the Gaming Authority has banned Crown from starting the High Rollers Casino for now, after the company admitted money laundering may have happened at its other venues. An inquiry into Crown's dealings will hand down its finding in February, and the watchdog will reassess its decision then. Well, it's the jewel of the Queensland coastline, but marine toxicologists say more needs to be done to monitor chemicals entering the Great Barrier Reef. Studies show thousands of chemicals are present in the water, and wildlife workers say it's causing deformities in turtles.
Jenny Gilbert has made saving sick and injured turtles her life's work. The founder of the Cairns Turtle Rehabilitation Centre says many of her patients come from the Great Barrier Reef.
We're seeing an increase in a lot more animals that are really sick.
She says turtles are hatching with unexplained defects.
We've actually seen several of the turtles come out of nests that have actually had abnormalities.
A recent report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature and Griffith University has called for greater monitoring of pollutants on the reef. It cites a previous study of more than 1,000 turtles off North Queensland, which found heart and kidney medication and anti-fouling paint and sealant in their blood.
We found literally thousands of chemicals in the sea turtles and their habitats in the Great Barrier Reef.
But he says what's most alarming are the substances which couldn't be identified.
Well, these turtles are being exposed to chemicals that we haven't looked at before or haven't looked for before.
11 sites on the Great Barrier Reef are being monitored for about 40 chemicals, mostly from agriculture.
We've been the political football. Peak body groups, both in the grazing industry, the cane growers and AgForce particularly, have been calling for all possible potential chemicals that could be within the water to be identified.
It's an idea supported by academics.
We'd like to see that extended to include pharmaceuticals, heavy metals, other chemicals that we know are now accumulating.
Researchers want contamination hotspots thoroughly investigated. The report suggests turtles living closer to the mainland are typically less healthy than those found at sea.
Some of the turtles, particularly in the coastal areas where the contaminants were higher, had high incidence of eye lesions and just generally in poorer condition.
For those on the front line, it's not a blame game, but a race for a solution.
People are taking antibiotics, people are taking heart drugs, people are taking diuretics, and it all goes out into the ocean. What we suppose we've got to look at is, is there any way of filtering it?
Jemima Burt, ABC News, Cairns.
Researchers are calling it the autism advantage, a range of specific skills those on the spectrum can bring to the workplace. Traditionally, it's been in fields like information technology, but as Craig Allen reports, one federal government agency needed a focused attention to detail and has recruited 2 neurodiverse workers for highly secure roles.
For Nick and Gordon, finding meaningful work has been an uphill battle at times.
Tough at first, but you'll get there eventually. It's like learning to drive.
Like other neurodiverse job seekers, they found getting a foot in the door was hard when they faltered in face-to-face interviews.
You get in a room with somebody and you kind of go into panic mode.
Oh, this guy doesn't make eye contact, so we couldn't possibly trust him to do any work for us.
Recruitment agents Specialist Stern find jobs for those on the spectrum and say Australian employers are beginning to come around to what they call the autism advantage.
By tapping into neurodiverse talent, you could give your business the competitive edge it needs.
I think the autism advantage is having complex brains that can solve really complex problems.
People on the spectrum do tend to, I guess, just be more rule-oriented and I guess more punctual, that kind of thing.
Instead of going through a formal recruitment process, Nick and Gordon were screened by Specialist Stern and now have landed highly secured jobs with Services Australia.
There was only one job that I wanted and I was the first pick for it, so great.
And from our perspective, what we've got, by simply keeping an open mind, is people that have the skills that we require. They're highly specialist and they're highly desirable from our perspective.
And also highly secretive.
I can't really go into the nitty-gritty details, but generally what we're doing is we're looking for, I suppose, data science solutions to identifying those fraud cases.
Now the challenge is for other employers to change the way they recruit.
It's not difficult to make reasonable adjustments to your recruitment process to be more accessible, to be more available to autistic candidates.
It's about recognising the differences and embracing them.
Whatever the opposite of bullying is, that's what I've experienced here.
An important first step on the career ladder. Craig Allen, ABC News, Canberra.